Hey guys, what's up? I'm Sadhan and your host for today's event, and I would like to welcome you on this AMA, which is about the future work. And today's AMA is brought to you by Designhill, world's largest creative marketplace. And in this platform, anyone can source high quality designs, irrespective of the fact that whether you are an enterprise or big corporation or anyone. So I would like to thank Ryan Roghaar, our guest for today's evening event, who has taken the time out of his schedule to be here to help many entrepreneurs with his awesome tips on value of human relationships and as they pertain to remote work, adaptation and being adaptable, developing soft skills, and much more. So Ryan, our speaker of the day, is the founder at Teammate Apart. He's an entrepreneur, award-winning creative director, podcaster, remote work advocate, consultant, author, and speaker committed to building authentic end-to-end relationships for his clients, from top management to top consumer. His unique philosophy puts specific importance on human relationships and their inherent value in both business and life. He believes that as a society, we are reaching to a kind of technological saturation point which is leaving consumers anxious and yearning for the tactile human experiences. And it is the core ethic that fuels his purpose to bring people together from his office in Salt Lake, Utah, or occasionally from his office away from home at Barcelona, Spain. He'll offer enlightening insights on vast range of topics. He loves to share his insights and experiences to help other explore fresh perspective of human businesses, lifestyle, and new ways of working. So Ryan, we welcome you here, and I would love to
Thank you so
say
much.
a good hi.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So, as Sid said, I'm Ryan Roghaar, founder and CEO of Teammate Apart. We're an organization whose goal it is to teach those working remotely and those who hire them how to work better together by creating conditions that foster meaningful relationships across teams. We do this by helping our clients uncover previously undiscovered or misunderstood problems in their organization. Then we develop and implement actionable solutions to those problems. So really grateful to be here, and hopefully we can talk about some exciting stuff. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So guys, we are all set here, and to all my audience, if you can see and hear us just fine, will you be kind enough and drop a yes in the chat section? So we have enough confirmation that you can see and hear us fine. So from the audience, if someone can hear yes, yeah. So thank you, Cheryl and Tessa, for your affirmations. And yeah, we are good to go. And one more thing before we proceed ahead. For all the audiences, guys, if you have any questions, please do not forget to ask them in the questions tab. So you will notify as soon your question is being answered. So before we go forward, here is a short video by Designhill that what we are, and then we will take the interview ahead. So guys, that was us. And before we start taking the questions, I will address the elephant in the room right now. So Ryan, is work from home going to stay? And COVID can be an informal push to it. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
no. So work from home was a thing before COVID. A lot of us may not realize that, but of course, so many of us were thrown into it as a result of the COVID outbreak. But it's been here for a long time, and it's certainly going to be a big part of our future. A lot of the reports and the recent things coming out, according to Buffer's State of Work in 2020, 98% of workers would like to work remotely, at least for some portion of their career, for the rest of their working life. With only 7% of regularly working people working from home before COVID, nearly 54% of people would be willing to quit their job at this point, meaning remote work, or at least the flexible work options, are going to remain critical, or going to be a big part of our future of work. Almost everybody, as a result of COVID, I mean, obviously there have been many people who've been furloughed or have lost work and things like that. But of those who can, nearly 64% of US-based employees are working from home now in response. And generally speaking, 59% of them, or 3 in 5, are hoping to continue doing that after COVID. So I think at least the reporting so far is showing that work from home is going to continue to be a thing. It was popular in the past, but I think now that people have had the opportunity to try, forced or not, I think people are going to be very interested in continuing down that road.
Yeah, of course. Ryan, it does sound really convenient and really easy, to put a certain teams in workforce. But, the companies who are actually not very well versed in this scenario, they often think that, can we put up an HR on work from home? Then there will be no personal feel in the interviews. Can you put a marketing team on work from home? Because even the marketing is hugely digital right now. It's very difficult to understand that some things can be done by their home as well. So they find it very difficult to wrap their heads around, and they couldn't figure out at which departments they can put on work from home and which they cannot. So they have to evaluate that what departments can they start putting on work from home or something on those lines, that how to grow into it department
Sure.
wise for an organization. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, and I think first things first, I want to make sure that, it's clear that not remote work isn't necessarily easy. Like trying to transition a whole team to a remote workforce or build working policies that are remote work policies that are useful and valuable. None of this is easy stuff, right? It's all work and you have to be committed to doing it. So with that sort of out there, I think, the ability for a company to make this transition for many has been exacerbated by COVID. So many of us were made to, forced to make sudden decisions that required us to go work from home. And as a result, we've sort of solved some of the problems already. At least by now, most companies who went remote did so around March or April, and we've had a few months now of doing this. And so hopefully, by now, a lot of the challenges that might have come up, technologically speaking, and some of these other things, will have occurred and we'll have already worked through them. One of the bigger problems, or one of the things I think may be coming, is a greater impact to our mental health. So we're going to start seeing more problems to do with isolation and miscommunications and things like this, problems that will come around that are sort of more related to soft skills than the hard technical stuff. Because I think by now, for many of us, we already have software sort of figured out. Sort of the rule of thumb that I use, if you're going to try and take your company remotely, is basically if the job can be done on a computer, from start to finish, then it's a good candidate for becoming a remote job. Obviously, if you're working in a factory or in manufacturing or something, and you don't have the ability to, take something offline, or take something online rather, it's, obviously not a good fit for remote. So it's certainly not going to be all things to all people. But as long as your team doesn't necessarily have to be together, maybe they like it, maybe they, could have the option to work together or have the flexibility to work apart. But if their team doesn't have to be together, if you already have the technology stack or the, processes in place that allow your team to communicate online, if all that stuff's already available, if you can't see any foreseeable negative departmental impacts, so if there's not something glaring that says, this absolutely won't work for this team, whether it's a personnel issue or a technology issue. And, there's also on the flip side of that, if you're actually hindering your team's ability by forcing them to work in a co-located environment, I would say any of those criteria are sort of things to consider when trying to take a job remote.
Of course, as you said, that there are a lot of challenges which come once you even envision the thought of working from home. So going on to the challenges part, sometimes people actually confuse how to measure the output actually. They fund, so they are always on those lines that is it the time spent or is the productivity which we have online. So how to measure the output actually? So it's
Yeah.
how efficient you are. It's the time spent on working, or what parameter do you use? What parameter do you use?
Well, one of the things that hopefully we have learned as a result of COVID and all this stuff is that micromanagement and really, trying to hammer down on time and things like that just doesn't work that well when we're apart. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's really difficult to really know what people are doing at any given time, right? And so what we focus on, or what we encourage people focus on, is output, not time. So for us, it's output, output, output. So by doing that, you can really begin to measure your productivity using different, sort of results-oriented kind of processes. So by setting clear goals, deadlines, expectations, this sort of stuff, so that it's clear and understood what the expectation is and what we're supposed to be delivering and when, that will allow you to sort of understand if work is getting done, right? That'll give you a top level view of if projects are being completed or not. And, once things are getting done on time and once projects are coming in as expected and all that stuff, like the amount of time or the how it got done, largely becomes irrelevant. It really becomes a matter of trust and understanding that your people are capable of doing what they're saying they'll do. And so by setting clear goals and expectations, planning for increased accountability, trusting and leaning on your employees a little bit more, analyzing and prioritizing your tasks to make sure that important things are getting done when they're supposed to be getting done, and then tracking that progress, whether you're using software or integrations with tools like Slack or things like this to monitor that process. It will allow you to really do a good job of monitoring these outputs versus the time spent. One of the things that happens with remote workers in general is that they're not great about setting boundaries and will often actually work more for you than your co-located people. Your folks that are coming into the office and working 8 to 5, have sort of a start time and a stop time, where a lot of times when we're working remote, those lines become a little fuzzy. We don't have a start and a stop necessarily. And so as a result, we may decide to work from, 4 p.m. to midnight to get a project done for the following day, instead of 8 a.m. to 3 or something. And really it doesn't make any difference, right? As long as the project is in on time on the next day. And so trying to really corral people's hours and monitor every minute they're spent online or whatever, it's just probably not that big a deal. But I do understand for a lot of business owners, it's really difficult to make that transition to trust, especially if you have a small business, a small team, and you're really trying to keep an eye on how much time is being spent here and there, because fortunately or unfortunately, so much of our system still revolves around time being billed. A lot of us are paying our employees that way, and it just is kind of what it is. I come from a marketing and advertising background, and in our agency, for example, we don't bill by time, we bill by project. And by doing that, by billing by project, we're able to break it into smaller chunks, identify, these different sprints or these different, segments of time or different deliverables. And then by making sure we're hitting deliverable deadlines on time throughout the course of the process, we're able to trust our team that they'll deliver on time. And so we're able to kind of watch that output, and the amount of time they spend on it matters less.
Ryan, you actually, it's actually a very good thing that you said about micromanagement. I would like to pick on that. The macro, in my experience, micromanagement has done more harm than good, because it just robs an employee of the freedom to work and just build. It's a building ground for very festering trust issues. So how to evolve beyond that? Especially from leadership and then to our colleagues, how to evolve beyond macromanagement?
Yeah, no, it's true. Micromanagement is really common, and I would almost say it's kind of human nature, right? It's, especially if you're a small business owner or you have a small team and you really need, double check that every dollar is being allocated correctly, that you're not overspending on time or resources, it does become really important. And so I think most of us feel this inclination to, really be on top of our people and pay close attention, see how much we can monitor. And so I think it's in our nature. But I think one of the things as it pertains to remote work specifically, and sort of the future of work, is maybe understanding some of the common misconceptions, the assumptions that a lot of us, especially young leaders, are making, and then sort of set those straight a little bit. So one of the primary misconceptions is that remote workers don't work as hard. And we talked about this just briefly a moment ago, but basically the misconception is that these remote workers, they're on a beach somewhere, or they're sitting in their living room watching TV while they're working. So there's this understanding or this belief that your remote worker isn't doing the work they ought to be doing. And but the reality is that as we mentioned, a lot of remote workers have a difficult time setting boundaries, and will often spend more time working on your projects than your other co-located guys. And so, I try not to beat on this too much, but every report you check, all the studies show that, largely speaking, and in general terms, remote workers are more efficient and get more done than their co-located counterparts. They simply most of them just don't have the distractions of the office. They're not being pulled apart. They're not sitting at the water cooler talking. They're not doing any of that stuff. And so, excuse me. So it allows them to get more done in less time. And so, so I think that that's a great misconception to sort of knock out. As an extension of that, we've got sort of the idea that remote workers just aren't working. That so and so is not in the office when we are, and so therefore they're not getting their job done. But the reality is they are, and as a manager, it's your job to trust that. Back to our discussion about measuring, deliverables or outputs instead of time. It's much easier done to trust in your employees getting their stuff done if you've set clear expectations. You've helped them by over communicating and helping to ensure alignment across the team. If everybody knows the rules, largely speaking, and in general terms, everybody will do their best to try and stick to it. So I think it's fair to start to trust your people in that sense. Another common misconception, and it can be true, is that your data isn't safe. A lot of times when you're working with a remote worker, a freelancer, or somebody who's not maybe on the team, there is always, especially in this day and age, there's always a chance that data could become insecure. The great news is technology really makes data security possible via remote. It's very doable nowadays. Establishing clear do's and don'ts, regarding best practices, maybe no use of public Wi-Fi, things like that, for example. And then you augment that with great technology, and generally speaking, your data will stay pretty safe. Another common misconception is this idea that communication can be ineffective or difficult. And I won't say that it can't be. To work with a remote team and use the tools of a remote team, the Slacks and the other communication tools of the world and all this other technology, certainly can take more work or more effort to use. And, versus maybe a conversation at the water cooler or walking, having a conference in the morning or something. So yes, it can be more difficult, but the truth is that, your teams are actually more connected than they've ever been. Now you can reach an employee or a coworker via Slack or a text message or an email or a phone call or a Zoom communication, whatever, with relative ease. And, so as a result, that can be, pretty easy and pretty effective these days. One of the things that we sort of advocate for as it pertains to communication, though, is setting clear expectations around communication or setting up sort of a comm structure. And the idea is basically, just as an example, and of course it will depend a lot on your corporate culture or your company's culture. But, let's say maybe if you send an email, the expectation is that you'll respond within 24 hours. If you send a Slack message or something, maybe you need to respond within an hour. A text or an SMS maybe is 10 or 15 minutes. And then, if I call you, I need you to pick up the phone. And by sort of sorting those channels in the order of urgency, so email being the least urgent and a phone call being the most urgent, it helps sort of, I guess, set a framework for communication. So people, who aren't maybe working in the same office, whether they're across town or across the planet, understand clearly how they're supposed to be communicating. So that's something easy to work on to make this easier and do a little less micromanaging. The last one I want to touch on is just this misconception or this understanding belief that remote work is lonely work. And it can be, for sure. For some people, it's really difficult. And I think that's, a good and a bad. So, and being excluded from a social group in the office can be every bit as isolating as being left alone at your house. So isolation, I don't think, is the problem. But what I really think that we need to be focusing on is just this, the factor of choice, being allowed to make a decision. So remote work isn't for everybody, and it isn't about forcing people into some kind of new modality. It shouldn't be a zero-sum game where it's either all remote or not remote at all. Rather, you should have the choice to do what works best for you. And the idea is that you're going to help your employees be their best version of themselves. So by, allowing remote work as an option for those it works well for, they're welcome to go do that. And for those who struggle, they're not, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll choose to work in the office. And so, but that flexibility is really what we're advocating for, not for sort of a forced new modality of work.
Ryan, speaking of flexibility and everything, once you start remote working, there are a lot of tools actually, which was you were saying right now. One is SMS, sometimes WhatsApp or Slack or email, and sometimes just to make things efficient to the last bit of it, we use a lot of tools sometimes. For communication, we have mail, Slack, and then we end up having a time tracker tool. Then we end up having a tool which even captures screenshots as well. Then I've seen tools which are actually can open your camera and see that you're working or not even. So sometimes it gets a too little bit too overwhelming. So
Yeah, well,
how to just have a friendly atmosphere that is professional enough and it has enough decorum that people work actually, but it is not too overwhelming.
yeah. So much of this, I mean, obviously there is a mountain of technology out there that facilitates remote communication nowadays, and it can be difficult. There are a lot of resources online for finding the best platforms or to do your research. Most companies offer free trials and things like that now, so it's pretty easy to try stuff before you buy stuff. And I think that that's all great. But a couple things you can do to try and avoid sort of overwhelm is develop some processes. And we talked a little bit about setting expectations around communication a moment ago, in terms of sort of prioritizing your communication channels and making rules or guidelines around the different modalities of communication. And that seems to help mitigate some of the chaos that comes with using a broad suite of tools. Also, we say sort of advocate for choosing a stack and sticking to it. So choose your software stack and then just stick to it, make it work. One of the things that happens a lot in the sort of technology space is there is a new shiny something almost every day or every week. There's a new technology or a new software or a great new app that maybe has a better UI or a better whatever. And so we're constantly jumping around between platforms. And that constant change makes it really difficult for your teams to get fully aligned. So I think it's really important to choose your stack and stick to it, and understanding that proper tools are critical. Also, you should try and look for complementary apps, those with sort of strong integrations with one another. Reduce the number of logins you have to make and the amount of different platforms you're logging into. And the more that the different platforms or different technologies can communicate with one another, the smoother the processes can be. And then finally, as it pertains to process, is providing appropriate training, making sure that your people are actually trained on these tools rather than just being thrown in. There is sort of I guess it's a misconception or an understanding that we can just, everybody has a baseline understanding of technology now, and you can just throw anybody into any application and they'll find their way around. And, for many people that's true, but I think that for a lot more people that isn't the case. And especially if you're working with people who are going remote that maybe have less experience with this kind of stuff, maybe older generations of people, or just, I don't know, even people from parts of the world that maybe don't have such access to technology. You can't go around assuming that everybody has the same level of understanding that you might as as the founder of a small tech company, for example. So I think it's important to make sure that you are training your people up and helping them understand how to actually use the tools, whether it's as the manufacturer of the tool would suggest or as you're using it in your company. I think it's really important to set those guidelines for people.
And speaking of tech, Ryan, what is your favorite tech stack for remote working?
I'm sorry, what's that?
So what is your favorite tech stack? So what tools do you prefer or do you use, employ, or recommend people using?
Sure. So the tools that we use the most, I mean, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but we use Slack also, like so many people do. Although I'm actually experiencing, and maybe other people can share this experience, but I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed on Slack channels. So many people are using Slack now, and it is really convenient to be able to jump onto other people's Slacks. And but what I find is now I have so many of them that I'm getting so many notifications from so many different places that it's really difficult to keep up. And so try and avoid that if you can. But there are other tools that like Slack, other internal, external, third-party type softwares that you can use for communication. But Slack is the one we use. Another tool we use is called Notion. And Notion is a great, I don't even really know how to describe it because it's kind of this all-in-one tool that does a million different things. We use it for sort of an in-house wiki almost. So our teammates or all our policy documents, everything live in this document inside Notion. And people are able to go in, they can schedule time off, they can look at budgets, they can do all that stuff through this one platform, through Notion. So that's been pretty great. And those are probably the two primary ones we use. For project management, we go back and forth. I swear every 2 years we change project management platforms. But we are using one right now called Active Collab that is pretty great. It has a lot of the functionality we like. It does all the invoicing and the billing and everything And because it's all in one platform, it ties very nicely to the projects that are being tracked and things like that. So it makes it easy to keep records. So we like that as our project management tool right now. And so, but that's sort of the extent of the stuff we're using. We do have a complete set, or I shouldn't say complete because there's hundreds of them, but we do have a set of recommendations at teammateapart.com that you can go check out that has, different tools for different folks.
That was actually a long list of the technologies which you can use, and I remember that you actually said a line before that as a manager, it is my job to trust my team. But once again, if the transition is very, very rapid, then even though a team is working real hard, I might have some doubts because even personally I face those doubts sometimes. Is my team working or not? Even though they deliver a lot, so I used to think that they might not have enough work on their hands even. So I had this thing, and of course, many people do have the same thoughts as well. So how to just mitigate that? Because now
Sure.
I'm evolving by learning, but how to mitigate that? Is there some best practice or tips you can recommend?
Sure. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, as we've discussed, I think it is human nature, at least to some degree, to want to do that, especially if your job, for example, as a manager, is tied to the performance of those underneath you. It can be very, like, you might feel this pressure to make sure that your team is performing, right? And so the way we do that is by micromanaging and being on top of our people all the time. And it feels kind of counterintuitive to back off and give them a little bit of space. And so it is a challenge for sure. And it's definitely something that I think comes with some maturity and comes with some practice, and making sure that you know how to work with people. But some of the things that we sort of advocate for are first, defaulting to transparency. Being open and honest in our communication, not hiding behind anonymity, all those sorts of things. And so, I mean, the more open and transparent we are with the people who work for us, it fosters an environment that allows us to trust. And so it's, sometimes as we were discussing, I mean, it can be difficult, but if kind of everything is on the table and we're not worried about keeping secrets or keeping, things from one another, it tends to sort of foster these trustworthy relationships. The comment I make about no hiding behind anonymity, it's really easy for people to, be critical or provide feedback that's negative and things like that if they don't have their name associated with it. So I've read of some companies, I believe it's Zapier, who basically requires that, yes, you have an open communication, you're willing to, say any message to the management, anything you want to say, but you can't hide. You have to say it as your name, and you have to be accountable for the things that you say. And by encouraging that sort of full transparency, it makes people, tend to be a little bit more respectful, and we all sort of work for the common good, which, sort of helps us trust. Another aspect is getting to know one another. It's funny because it's, such a fundamental part of being human is human relationships. It's a big part of how we live and how we grow. And it's no different in remote work. And it's funny, it seems a little counterintuitive because as you're thinking about remote work, you're thinking about being at home. But really the in-person relationships and the relationships we foster online are both contributing to our ability to trust one another. Obviously it's difficult to trust a stranger, but it's really easy to trust your friend. And so we sort of advocate for, relationships and developing great relationships which will go on to breed empathy building trust, and trust is what we're actually trying to achieve. So it's a pretty great thing. And the way that I talk about remote relationships sometimes is in sort of using the metaphor of filling a glass of water. So if an email is, 10 drops of water, and a text is a quarter cup of water, and a Zoom call is 90% of a glass of water, the more we can keep our water full, the more satiated we'll be. So if we can meet in person and get our full glass of water, that's great. But if we can't because we're on other sides of the planet or whatever, that's fine. We'll survive on 90% of a glass of water. And so, we can take our conversations online. They don't have to be in person, but I will always advocate for, dinner among friends or a cup of coffee in person, even if the rest of our time we spend remote. And those relationships that we build will sort of help foster this culture of trust. The next thing, and we've talked about this a couple times, but is the idea of setting clear expectations, then sticking to them. This is kind of an extension of the transparency thing we're talking about. But basically, if we all know the rules, then we can rely on one another to live up to them. There's a little bit of social currency, again, if you have a relationship with your coworkers. and you can trust them, and you know that they're good folks and they're going to live up to expectation. Well, then if we all know the same expectations, we can all live up to those and make sure that we're doing our part. The longer we are all meeting our expectations and the more comfortable our management can become with our ability to do so, the more they can trust and sort of step back a little bit. Again, and we talked about this at the beginning, but it's focus on output, not staying put. So it's the, sort of an extension of the expectation and goal setting, but it's this idea that you can rely on a teammate to accomplish what they say they'll do, regardless of how they get it done. So, we used the example earlier about sort of, people who work overnight versus people that work during the day or whatever. But as long as the output is there when it's supposed to be there, then how they got it done is much less relevant. The last thing in this sort of category is automation. And this is one of the huge benefits of technology that we have nowadays, is leveraging this automation to really understand what's happening in our workplace. And it can be difficult. There's a lot of data being generated all the time if you've got Slack going and different softwares going all the time. But you also have the ability to do some reporting and things like that. So, if you do, like, for example, an integration from a project management system into Slack, for example, there will be a steady stream of, work getting done appearing in your Slack channel that you can sort of look at and go, okay, as a manager, I'm good. I know people are getting stuff done.
So I will actually come back on a problem of empathy because there are some doubts in my head. I want to clear that up. But before we go, let's have a short break of a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and move ahead with the discussion. So Ryan, is that fine with you?
Yep, that sounds great.
Sure. So guys, we'll be back in a couple of minutes, and we will carry this discussion ahead. So guys, we are back, and we have Ryan with us once again. And so Ryan, when we left for the break, we used a word called empathy, and that is something which I'm quite intrigued with because I have the possibility of working with some guys who are actually across the globe, and sometimes I have seen people refusing to come on a video call. They are fine with an audio call or something, but with some cultural innovation, some people cannot even come on video call. They must have their reasons, but sometimes empathizing with them gets a little bit of difficult because people think, okay, if that's their problem, not ours. Even they're getting the job done, because I've seen some ladies, I had some female colleagues which are in some conservative parts of the world, and they are really afraid to come on video calls and everything. So how to empathize with those dimensions, and this can actually extend to various other factors as well, but empathy factor is something which you want to work on.
Yeah, no, empathy, I think, is one of those things, and it gets thrown around a lot, but it is a difficult thing for people to really employ, especially, if you don't have a relationship, or for in the example you're using, where maybe they don't come on a video call. And I mean, I work with a lot of contractors and remote people all over the planet who I've never even met, and it is difficult to trust those people. So one of the things I say, for especially for managers, is sort of lead by example. I mean, obviously you can't force these guys to turn on their camera or whatever, even though it is sort of best practice to have cameras on. As sort of a introvert myself, I can speak from a little bit of experience in that I hate being on camera. This is not my thing at all. And, I recognize that it's a necessary evil, and it's a big part of the work that I do. And so it's important, if I'm to get out there and share my message and do these things, then unfortunately I have to suck it up and do it. But if I had my choice, I would oftentimes not turn on the camera either, especially in the past. Now I understand I have to live up to what I preach. But yeah, definitely I can understand why people may not come on. And I'm sure people have a myriad of reasons. Sometimes it could be just insecurities about their workspace, for example. Maybe they just don't like the room they're in, or the place is a mess and they don't want to look bad on camera. Or it could be, technology. It could be, internal problems. Maybe they're insecure and don't feel good coming online. So all that stuff, is going to be really difficult for you to fully overcome as a manager, because it does take a little work on the end of the other person. However, if you can lead by example. So project empathy, make sure that people understand that you really do care about them and that you're trying to make life, better for them. So, also, make sure your camera's on, that kind of thing. Make sure that, you're being open and transparent, sharing your space, and, even just sharing personal anecdotes and things like that. What's going on in your life? Oh, I was just walking the dog and now I'm here. Let's do our call. That kind of thing. But bringing people into your life a little bit can allow the empathy to sort of flow a little bit. And, ultimately these people, the people who choose not to come on camera need to do a little bit of work on themselves. And so it does require facing some fears and coming to the next level. And you can't force anyone to do that. But I think leading by example is a good way to do it.
So I'm actually talking about fears. Sometimes people think that if I'm not in office now, which I'm changing perspective a little bit. I'm talking from the end of an employee actually. Let's say I'm an employee and I'm not in office right now, I'm working remotely. So I have this fear in my head that my manager or my reporting, so any person I'm reporting to right now, they cannot see me working hard enough. So I might be invisible. So my efforts might go unnoticed, even though they cannot be just translated into the form of a timeline or a graph or something like that. But my efforts will go unnoticed. My energy, my vibes will be not visible to the people. So how to get that fear out of my head right now? That FOMO, that fear of being invisible and unnoticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, we all have these voices in our head that are talking to us and making us feel insecure about different things. And so it is a challenge for sure. One of the things that I think you can do is, I mean, basically it requires a little extra effort, but, go above and beyond and over communicate to people. Let people understand that it's very important that the work that you're doing and that you take pride in the work that you're doing. And so make sure that you're sharing those things with people. Sometimes, we do good work and we want our good work to be seen, but it's very easy for it to be overlooked, especially while we're working remote. And as you mentioned, I mean, it might show up on a report or something, but what does that really mean? And so I do think it's really important that you over communicate. Now, you do need to be careful. You don't want to brag or come off like, oh, hey, look at what I'm doing, but at the same time, it is important to be, what I would call sort of a hand raiser. So if you've got an employer and you want to make sure that you're seen or that you're on radar, well, then you have to be on radar. You need to raise your hand when there are opportunities. You need to speak up when when there's opportunities to speak. And so as an employee, that responsibility is kind of on you. Your manager is busy overseeing, however large your team is, but they're busy managing people and they're busy, doing their job as well. And, they honestly can't take the time to sit and do that. But the ones who do raise their hand and who are constantly available and constantly providing feedback, those will be the people who rise to the top. And in a remote environment, you can do this by, you're the guy participating in all the Slack channels. You're being a part of the conversations wherever the conversations are being had. you're submitting your work on time and delivering, and meeting expectations or exceeding expectations in any way you can. And I think that all that stuff, would also be true in the office, but working remotely, those might be some methods for doing it, for illustrating it.
Yeah. So yeah, that actually is some pretty good points. And let us say, if you have to pick out some best practices, in a very short, crisp format, that these you should have to be an efficient company which relies on work from home. So what would those practices be?
Yeah, and so most of these will be sort of for the small business owner, although I think they're largely true for the worker as well. And that's one of our big focuses at Team Made Apart, is making sure that we're both educating the employee and the employer, because it's a two-way street. We have to work together. So I obviously don't have the expertise to tell every company how to get organized, but the thing I can tell you in terms of stuff is that sort of fundamental knowledge and the things that we sort of take for granted or overlook a lot are really some of the things that we need to focus more on. And having this great foundation at the beginning, whether it's as a manager or as an employee, is really critical. So we'll sort of encourage our people, the people that we're working with, to begin with sort of a people first culture. A lot of people say that out loud, but the idea is that you actually do empathize and you actually do care about your people. And the byproduct of this care and the work you're doing with your employees will be the thing that feeds the great performance and allows for the great outputs. But it's because you care about your employees that they want to do that work for you. So I think starting your organization in a people first manner is something to consider. We just talked about this step or this bit briefly, but the idea of creating a culture of empathy, making sure that it's understood that you do really care about your coworkers. They're not just a line item or a number on a sheet. They actually are a relevant piece of your business, and it's very important to you that you have a relationship with them. You can do this through, regular touch bases or calls. You can do so much by email and Zoom, but maybe once a quarter you get on the phone with everyone, or, do one-on-one meetings with people by Zoom or however your team works. And by doing that and just sort of, again, practicing what we preach, being empathetic to our people and making sure they understand that we truly care, I think will go a long way. The next thing, and this is a little bit organizational, but is just making sure that you have great processes in place. So again, setting clear expectation, rules, guidelines, giving people what they need to be able to do their job well, and understanding what is expected of them so that they can try to live up to it is critical to being able to run a business, and B, even if you're a remote worker, or for those of us who freelance and spend a lot of time working on our own, where we're essentially self-employed, those processes for the freelancer are the same as the processes that for a large corporation. I mean, we all have to have our processes, so it's really critical. Another topic I talk about a lot, and maybe too much actually, is this idea of intent. Making sure that we're approaching things with proper intention, and either as a worker or as a manager, back to your idea about how do you be noticed if you're a worker, going out with proper intention will help you achieve that end. If you are set on making sure that you are seen and that the work you're doing is being appreciated and all these things, and you act in a way that is according with that, then you'll likely rise to the top. Same thing if you are trying to be a great manager and you want people to understand that you're empathetic and that you actually care about them, all these things, setting that intention up front and understanding that I want to be the kind of manager that people understand, knows, cares about them. That can be really critical. So I think setting intention is really good. We touched on this earlier, is the idea of being camera on. So as a best practice in general, especially as we're working remote these days, make sure your camera's on all the time. I know it's uncomfortable. I don't like it either, but it is something we need to do. And, if it's going to be, 90% of filling that glass of water in terms of relationship development, then it's important that we're able to make at least virtual eye contact with the people we're talking to. And finally, and we kind of talked about this as well, but is this idea of leading by example, and just making sure that in our company, and even though it's a little corny or it's a little like old, kind of attitude, but leading by example is really critical, and making sure that, if you want people to work really hard for you or achieve great things under your management, Well, then you need to be a great manager. You need to lead by a great example, because, great people beget great people. And, if you spend all day on the sofa and you actually are part of the problem, people are going to have a hard time empathizing and working for you. So those, I think, are some fundamental sort of best practices that you can sort of build into your business or your organization.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. And for a person who is too shy to be on camera, you're doing really good.
Thanks so much. I mean, I do it a lot now, so I feel like I'm getting better at it, but it is not my number one thing, I promise.
So I guess you have grown into it.
Yeah. Well, and that's
And
it, right? Face our fears. We got to work through those things, and it sucks, and we want somebody to tell us how to do it or how to make it easier or whatever, but sometimes you just have to do it. And, whether you like it or not, you just have to do it.
yeah, and before we wrap this up session, I would like to have one more answer from you.
Sure.
Since from your history, I reckon that you have been a creative person as well. You have been into advertising and all those fields as well. In advertising, we have this word called brainstorming or campaign or something. So that sometimes become real hard to put on a piece of paper. In terms of timeline, actually, you cannot actually quantify your ideas.
Yeah, it's really difficult to do this, and honestly, I'm not sure anybody's actually solved this.
Yeah.
Working and sort of deciding what the value of your stuff is super objective, and basically, it's the old phrase, the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's the same reason that Banksy can spray paint a piece of concrete and sell it for $200,000, but I spray a piece of concrete and my wife just gets mad at me. I mean, but it all has to do with value, perception of value. And so, confidence is one of the biggest factors in this, actually, is, as a great designer, somebody who spent a lot of time, and, there are certainly differences between good and bad creative and things like that. I mean, you can use some objective metrics to look at those sorts of things and understand that, well, this just isn't technically well done or something like that. So you can obviously, judge creative work on those kinds of parameters. But understanding what the real value is basically what the person buying it will pay for it. And so, it's difficult to do that. It's understanding the value. And I think that, to bring it all sort of full circle, this goes back to our conversation sort of about empathy and understanding. If you're doing creative work and you're doing these kinds of things under the, recognizing that you're doing something to try and make your client's life better, whether it's, create a better brand that will sell them more product or whatever. But if you're coming from a good place and you're actually trying to do great things for your client or for your end user, you'll find that the value usually comes with it. The more you can solve an expensive problem, the more valuable your work becomes.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was something which I needed to hear that, because in the field of being in marketing and advertising, things become tough for us, because sometimes we cannot actually put. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, our clients, generally speaking, they don't want to pay for it. To be perfectly honest. I mean, and it's for those reasons, right? It's the things that we were talking about. It's the perception of value and sort of the intangible nature of creative work, right? I mean, you know it when you see it, but until then, how do you know what it's really worth? And and ultimately, it is all up to sort of the end user's opinion. But I think if you come at it from the right perspective and you're being intentional in the work you're doing, you're trying to be empathetic to the end user, to your client, you're trying to solve a hopefully expensive problem, then the value of what you're doing is more inherent or more obvious. And so I think that'll help.
Yeah, so now before I end this session, so I will actually take two keywords with me. First being empathy and second being involving, because that's something we all need to do. And that was amazing, Ryan, and the session was amazingly value packed. We touched upon a lot of topics and answered a lot of questions related pertaining to managing virtual teams and strengthening virtual communications. So although there is a lot more that we could have discussed, unfortunately we have a limited time at our disposal. So I hope you guys loved this session. Once again, Ryan, thank you so much for being with us, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time with you guys. I hope there was some good information. For anybody who needs additional things, they can check us out, teammadeapart.com. I'm also going to drop a link here in the chat. It's just a sign up for our email if people would like to get weekly information about remote work and all these other things. And then finally, if anybody just wants to email me or contact me directly, I'm easily found on LinkedIn. And also you can find me it's ryan@teammateapart.com.
Yeah. So guys, make sure that you follow him and you get all hands-on of all of him, so you can have also information at your disposal now. And for the people who are there right now, this is the end of the session, but we have a lot more events lined up for you in the coming days. If you guys are interested and haven't registered yet, I'm putting the link out in the events page of the chat section, where you can find all of our upcoming events right now. So here guys, here goes the link on your screen. So go ahead and register for the upcoming events as well. And for the people who are actually entrepreneurs right now, who are having a tough time, as a nonprofit initiative, we have launched an exclusive website to help COVID affected businesses to raise some extra working capital. And it is actually based on paying forward. So you can put your coupons over there, and your customers can buy it beforehand. So you have a constant revenue inflow. So do check that website out. The link must be flashing right now on your screens as well. So on that note, I would like to say bye to everyone who joined for the session. And guys, please take care and stay safe in these times, because of course health is wealth. And Ryan, thank you for your time, and it was something brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Have a great one, guys.
Thank you, guys.